Yo, everybody. Another episode of the Mind Body Marathon podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about race preparation and performance preparation. On today's show is my beautiful wife, Samua. And we are doing this show because she's coming up upon her key focus race of the year,
if you can call it that.
which is the Columbus Half Marathon here in Ohio, middle of October. And she's been thinking about this race for most of the year. So we're going to kind of use this as a platform to walk through some of what I would consider to be some of the basics and some of the key things that you should focus on heading into a race. So yeah, how are you feeling getting ready for the weekend?
Well, as you know, life has happened. So we first started talking about this race like end of May, I think. And me and my crazy friend Bri that are always doing the races together were like, okay, let's, we keep signing up for these races. They're mostly Disney fun races. And we keep telling ourselves that leading up to it, we're going to train, we're going to be ready. And then we show up and we're not. So then usually our race preparation is just like, we're not trained. We're just going to try to survive, wear our costumes, high five characters. So the night before, we're just probably going to go grab a glass of wine, hang out. We're not doing any kind of prep. But we had wanted to try to do a race where we really trained, saw where we were kind of at, what we were capable of, thought of Columbus, figured we had plenty of time that way. And then for both of us, and me especially, the summer went totally unplanned of, getting all these jobs, shooting movies and TVs that was not on the radar 6 months ago.
No, not at all.
And so then it was like, okay, this is plan B now for Columbus. I'm not going to shoot for this new PR. I'm going to shoot to feel good and be aggressive with it. And been somewhat training for the past like 5 weeks.
So 5 weeks ago, she started training for this, and you'll hit maybe a total of 12 runs.
Maybe.
Before the race. So
then I had one new goal. I was like, okay, that's the PR's out the window. My trusty coach here had to scrap his plan a little bit because I was never
what is your
home.
PR in the half?
Like 148 or 149.
Okay.
It's the towpath half. So then we talked about a new goal that I had in mind, and I don't know if that's attainable now because all of a sudden I had to drive to New Jersey and be back on set, and a couple nights of only 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So again, which with the new goals comes different mindsets a little bit with the race prep too.
Yeah. So, this just brings up a key concept of as you get closer to the race, it's important that you evaluate all the factors that contribute. And one of them is, were you able to train properly? Are you battling injury? Are you battling sickness? Or in your case, lack of sleep and just different lifestyle things. So and then you have to sort of reevaluate your goals based on that. And it's always better to kind of undershoot a little bit because especially when you're hitting those longer distances, you don't want to commit to a pace too early. That's going to be detrimental for you later in the race. So you kind of just want to sort of ease into it and maybe take some of that anxiety and expectations off. But say you're humming and you're feeling great, well then obviously push forward and get after it. But we're going to walk through some of the strategic things you can do the week of, the couple days before, all those sort of things that will help improve your performance.
And some of it like you touched upon, like it's so important that as you get close within this first, even a week ago, I thought I was going to have one particular plan for the race, and that changed because of what happened this past week. And especially for a person, well, I guess it applies probably at your level of running as well. But like, as we all know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I don't love running. I would say I hate running. And even as I meet new people and I'm talking to them on set, whatever, they're like, oh, so you're a runner. And like, literally my default every single time, like, is to be like, no. So it just, to have the race have that end positive effect that running itself would do, where you finish that race and you're just proud of yourself and all the good challenges that you go through, is to just be realistic. And, like if you screwed up your training because whatever, you just didn't stay committed or because life happened, it's like, just own it. And then just change your expectations so that when you cross that finish line, mentally, you're still like, it didn't go how I had originally planned because life took its turns, or I just wasn't, committed. But I still did a really hard thing that most people aren't doing on a Sunday morning.
And that brings up the biggest point, is that not anybody on this podcast or listening will ever be the best ever. Like that's not a thing. The N of one in the sport of running is it's just impossible. It's a statistical impossibility. So just go out and have fun and enjoy the experience. But most importantly, just always know that when you push yourself, no matter what, if you hit your goal or not, no, if you push yourself and you can look yourself in the mirror later in the day and you know you pushed yourself, like then that's a great experience. And that's what we're all here for is just you running is just sort of a mechanism to teach us on how to push ourselves and challenge ourselves and reach new goals and which allows us to be better husbands and better wives and better parents and etc. And
Running
better,
is definitely a great catalyst for inner change
yeah.
because partly when you are running, especially like, you've rubbed off on me. So the last few years that I do run, I don't have headphones. And, I did a 10-mile run a couple weeks ago and I was nothing, like no headphones, no nothing, just ran the 10 miles. And, back in the day, I used to always have music, which that was beneficial too. Um, but like I mentioned to you the other day, like I wish I had Elon Musk's thing that he wants to create with the chip
The
because like
Neuralink.
I have these amazing thoughts during my run and I want to come home and like be able to write them down. And by the time I get to my car, I don't remember 3/4 of them. Whether it be like just again processing my days, my emotions, my relationships, and like clearing that up in my head, or coming up with like, oh, I love this idea and I want to share this with somebody, like
Yeah.
this thought, and it is gone by the time I get to the car.
Well, I know we've all experienced that, and that's all the more reason to keep running, right? So you keep inventing things in your head. Getting down to specifics. Um, so one of the biggest things that I think about that I think people need to know about heading into races is if your race is over 90 minutes, basically we can store about 90 minutes worth of glycogen in our body, which is free carbohydrate. Stored in our muscles, stored in our liver. Once you get past 90 minutes, you're going to need sustenance. So you're going to need, like goos or, Gatorade or some hydration, but in addition to some carb sequence during the race. Um, Prior to the race, this is when carb loading becomes important. And the most important days for carb loading are 2 to 5 days out. Um, Specifically that 2 to 3 day out.
Which I think is a huge misconception out
It
there.
it is, so that's why we're covering this. So
Because like all the races that when I first started running and until like you educated me on this stuff, like all the Disney races, and like if they had, like I did fundraising with groups and it was a big deal that they had this like carb loading dinner for all of us, or even Disney, you used to be able to buy tickets to go into Epcot and have this
Yeah.
like big, huge, awesome dinner there. It was always the night before the race.
Yeah. I know, like, even if you
which
go
is like the
even if
dumbest thing now.
even if you run the Boston Marathon and you go to what's the little area that
Uh, oh my gosh, Little Italy, but why can I the North
North Shore.
North no, it's not North
No,
Shore.
it's not.
It's North something. Why am I having a brain fart?
Oh, man, you're from Boston.
I
Yeah.
know.
But anyways, if you go to Little Italy and you try to get a reservation the day before the marathon, it's booked. But if you go 2 days out, which really should just be your last major meal. So if your race is Sunday, you would go Friday night would be your last major meal. In the night for carb loading. It's wide open. Like
Yeah.
it's literally like wide open. It's crazy. But so let's back up a little bit. So 2 to 5 days out. So say your race is Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're going to start, ramping up a little bit more with a couple
The
hundred.
North End. Sorry, that
North
was
End.
really bothering me.
Boom, nice job. So yeah. So early, kind of mid to early in the week, you're going to ramp up with a couple hundred more calories of carbohydrates. And then once you get towards, again, this is considering a Sunday race, then your Friday evening will be your last kind of big meal. Then Saturday morning will be also a little bit heavier meal, but not quite as heavy. And then once you get to midday Saturday and then on, you're pretty much just like, just not eating heavy stuff, like maybe a little bit of salad, maybe just kind of some munching sort of stuff. And you don't want to go to bed like super full with a ton of like, pasta and carbs in your system because that won't make it through the gut prior to your race. It just doesn't have time. It takes a couple days to assimilate that. It takes a couple days to get that bolus through your system. And so you don't want to sabotage yourself with that. You're going to have bubble guts if that's the case. And we've all been there. So it's just important for you to understand that, the last major meal really is the morning before, and then the last carb loading meal is that like Friday or so. Now I know there are some different nutritionists out there that are would differentiate with this, but I think when you're increasing the carbohydrate intake, it's really only a couple hundred calories a day of carbs more. So it's not like you're going willy-nilly crazy with, like, tons of ice cream and tons of pasta and just going crazy with it, like, don't be ridiculous. You're just really just increasing, like, maybe an extra couple slices of bread, maybe just an extra serving at dinner sort of thing, and thinking along those lines, and maybe having the meals will be a little bit more carb-oriented rather than just like, steak dinner sort of thing. You are eating, like, spaghetti and that kinda stuff. Um, and I think that's an important concept, but to specifically avoid doing heavy carbs the night before.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people's mind just got blown because most races kind of set it up that way. I mean, Chicago Marathon, I can think of so many that I've
Yeah.
done that's how they
I
set it
mean,
up.
it's just a traditional thing, and you hear, like, even, like, cross country camps and or, like, cross country
Yes,
teams,
the
they'll
night
have, like,
before.
pasta night the night before, and that is just the race is not even close to 90 minutes, so you don't even need a carb load there, but it's fun, and it's, something that people are just sort of like it's just the culture of running, but, just kind of keep in mind that the more you eat there, it's just a bolus that will not get through your gut in time, and so that's just an important concept.
Yeah. I think another thing too, which a lot of people hear this, but sometimes you may kind of forget about it, but like don't do anything new race day. Like you mentioned the
Yeah,
goos, whatever. One of the things that I kept doing the first probably like 2 years that I was running, so it was almost every race, I would finish my races and my stomach was just a mess. And I felt so crappy. There was a couple of races where I had to stop to use porta potties. And I was always blown away because I'm like, oh, I do, when I do my training runs, like I'm fine, I'm fine. And it took me almost a year and a half, and probably even a conversation with you during one of my appointments back then, where I realized that when I was training and I ran with my goos and then I switched to wafers because I didn't love the goos, the jelly beans, like those were probably my two go tos for a while, which I also didn't realize like I was way overeating too during the race back then. But I never had Gatorade. But then when I was running the races at all the water stops, like I
yeah,
only carried my water bottle with me when I was training and I never had Gatorade. And then so that is actually what was wrecking me was the fact that now
yeah,
all of a sudden at race day I was adding some Gatorade. And I would even do it where the first couple water stops I would get just water, and then like I would strategically think like every other one is when I would get both water and Gatorade. And it just took me forever to realize that what was wrecking me and kind of messing up some of my races because I would have to stop and use porta potties a couple times. I remember specifically the Cleveland
yeah.
Marathon one time. Because I was just adding in Gatorade and wasn't used to it, I wasn't training with it. So that's definitely number one.
Yeah, and even for other things like, when I did the rim to rim to rim, I was told the week before I left that, "Oh, yeah, like, trail toes is, like, such a great thing you should use for your feet to, like, help with blisters." So I bought it and tried it, and I had never tried it before until I was doing the 46-mile challenge at the Grand Canyon, and sure enough, I got blisters. Like, literally 3 miles in, I got blisters, and so I just went back to, like, my what I'm familiar with, and that's Body Glide on the feet, and
Which
so
was a race trick that I didn't know about. So that's a good race
no,
prep
and
trick right
this is
there.
critical. So, like, the difference is, like, if you use, like, Vaseline or, like, Trail Toes, those are petroleum based, and they're basically just pasty, essentially, and it's real easy to just push that off your skin. So if you use that for, like, on your feet, like, you just smush down, it's just gonna, like, move away from where it should be, essentially protecting from the friction. But if you use like Body Glide, which I don't think there's anything that compares to Body Glide, I think it's just the best thing ever with regards to protecting blisters and chafing. That like literally sticks to your skin. So even when you press on your sock and the shoe, it doesn't move away and it literally stays there the whole time. So just if anybody deals with blisters, like definitely just lather your whole foot in between your toes, on the end of your toes, under your feet, Body Glide.
Also, ladies, if you're running like a half marathon or longer, body glide like all around your bra line, like everywhere. Because I remember it was like my third race. I had ran the Disneyland half marathon. And that race, like leading up to it, I was actually training decently good. So I finished the race and I felt fantastic. I'm like, oh, this is like the best I felt for a race. Like I could have kept, I think I was training for the full at that point. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I could definitely kept going. Like it was just so much fun. Then I got in the shower and then like turned around to like wash my hair and like literally yelled because my like the tag or something in my sports bra, I don't even know what it was, but like must have just moved back and forth. And it looked like I had these little whippings in the back. And when the water hit it, it stung so bad. So if you're running with costumes, like just bathe in Body Glide, like anywhere that there's seams. Cause like even just like the little stitching of the seams, once you get past a half, especially going into a full. So if you have to use a whole Body Glide stick, use it. But ladies, think of the bra lines and then any other kind of obviously where your skins are exposed and between your legs,
Yeah.
me and my Brazilian thighs. So like I always have to do that if I'm going to run in shorts. Just think of those little spots.
Guys, nipples, that kind of thing.
I have I mean, I haven't seen it too many times, but it is true. Like the whole like bleeding thing. There's
Yeah.
for the marathons that I've run a couple times. Yeah. It's like, ugh.
Yeah.
And then they were wearing white shirts too. Poor guys.
Yeah, I know. It's a thing. Well, the other thing too to consider as you're heading into a race is you want to have the process of heading into a race become like a ritual. Just like just like in life, you wake up in the morning, you have sort of a ritual where you have your coffee, you have your food, you just sort of like have this routine that you just is mindless and you just sort of like go through. You want race days to be that way, where you have your uniform or your racing gear, and you have it like specifically in a very specific set out in a specific way, and you're used to eating the right kind of things. You've already tested all that sort of stuff, and I think it's just important to sort of just make it ritualistic, and it just like takes away from the overall stress of the event, and just basically just disarms you with any last little bit of frustrations or details, because every race is different, and especially if you're going to a major marathon, there's getting to the start line, there's the preparation, dealing with all the people, there's the bathrooms, there's all that sort of stuff, and you don't want your outfits. And Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries. So again, running, your hair and your food and all that to be of stress. So just definitely develop a ritual.
I mean, yeah. So usually the night before, making sure that like where the starting line is, or even like a day before, if you're traveling somewhere or going to a different location of like within Ohio, like we were checking where's our hotel, where's the start line, where's the finish line, making sure that, like you said, in the morning when we wake up, you're not like stressing all of a sudden trying to find the address and oh crap, like we thought it was going to be a 20-minute drive and it's actually 35, and then that just throws off your flow.
That's why a lot of people will do like flat, like a flat,
your flat running buddy.
Yeah, like flat Leo or flat Samua, like right before the night before they take a picture of it, because they're just setting their gear out so they can just get up and just put it on and it's sequenced.
Know where your safety pins are for your bib.
Yeah.
I've had a couple races where I'm running out the door. I actually have had also nightmares about that sometimes where like I'm trying to, it's like the night before the race and it's like when you travel really early, I'm like crap, I don't have safety pins. And then thankfully I wake up and realize it's just a nightmare.
I always travel with a bunch of safety pins just in case.
So we talked about don't carb load the night before. And then what about hydration?
Yeah. So the most important thing about hydration is it has to be based with electrolytes. It's not okay to just drink a bunch of water. I've literally had patients give themselves water toxicity by drinking too much water before a race. Hyponatremia, which is water toxicity, is not great. What that term means is hypo, going back to high school chemistry, is less than natremia. Na is the chemical icon for sodium. So hyponatremia is low sodium, essentially. So make sure you're using products like Element or Liquid IV or something the couple days prior. You want to make sure that you're at least having one of those once a day. If you take in a decent amount of sodium, you've heard from some of our previous episodes, like you're just going to pee it out, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's going to make it through your system and get into the kidneys. So like you don't have to worry about having a lot of excess sodium, but you definitely need ample electrolytes in your body to retain water. So it's not okay to just drink a lot of water. It's important that you complement that with electrolytes. And again, that is the week of the race. So you have to go into the day before is obviously important, but you can't just catch up the day before. It takes a while for cells to sort of adequately get hydrated. They may kind of sit at like, 85, 90% hydrated on a normal basis. But if you do this throughout the week, you can get them tapped out at 100%, and in which it takes a decent bolus and
So I'm
stimulus
already
to do that.
screwed for Sunday with hydration then.
You are. I get on her all the time. That's about half my conversation with her is like, "Are you drinking water?" kind of thing. You
Yeah,
drinking?
I was on set and we can't go pee every 2 seconds. So, I mean, we're lucky if we go pee like 2 times a day.
Yeah. So that's just
So
things you got to
I
consider.
totally shot myself in the foot with that one.
Yeah. So, but the hydration is critical. So that's a really good point.
Now, what are you doing as far as like well, I mean, again, like
Well,
going back to like the different racing.
can I do one more point with
No, you
hydration?
can't.
uh, there are certain products that you can take in that can be diuretics. Um, Caffeine and alcohol are diuretics, which
And well,
which basically mean that it forces kind of water out of the system, but it's not so bad. It's still kind of a net positive. So still, you can still have your coffee the weeks of the race. That's fine, and your caffeine. Um, However, I would abstain from alcohol the majority of that week. I don't think it's terrible if this is going to sound crazy. If the night before you actually have a glass of wine or some light
calm
serving of
your
alcohol.
nerves.
Exactly, mainly to just calm your nerves, because this brings up the most important point with regards to sleep. Um, so basically, sleep, the most important time for sleep is basically 2 to 3 days out from the race. Say your race is Sunday, then Friday night is the most important night of sleep. You can basically not sleep Saturday, and that would be fine because you're gonna basically be within your cortisol window. Um, but so don't stress if like you're running like the New York Marathon or something like that, and you got to wake up at 3 in the morning to get to Staten Island. Like that's fine. Like that night before the race, you're okay to just like not have a full night's rest. That's pretty typical. So if you have the jitters and you're definitely anxious and you're stressed and you can't get a good night's sleep, then maybe a glass of wine can calm that down. And then that's more important because I know that can maybe mess with sleep, but calming down your nerves is more important than actually getting a good night's sleep the night before. But again, the Friday night, the Thursday night, the Wednesday night before, the most critical nights of sleep.
See, that's what really makes the dopey challenge like so hard at Disney. And we always joke about this that running the 5K, 10K, half and full, like the actual running itself isn't even horrible back to back to back, but it's 4 nights where you don't get sleep. So by the time you go to run the full, you have already had 3 nights of like
Yeah.
crappy sleep. So you're screwed.
Yeah.
And or you're just dopey.
Or you're just obese.
But with the electrolytes too, and the hydrating, that was such a game changer for me too. When I realized that one, Gatorade just was not working with my stomach, and then two, added in salt pill intakes throughout the race.
Hmm.
And because back then there wasn't Elements, which is that, especially their new bubbly drink, I really do like that a
Yeah.
lot. Actually, that drink is delicious because even all the teenagers that are picky at our house like that drink a lot. But definitely like taking in the what are they? Was it salt stick? Is that
Yeah.
what? Yeah. So like I don't like the IVs or any of that, but I like the Elements and I like
Mhm.
having the capsules and plus they're easy to have the capsules and keep them
Yeah.
in your running pouch or pocket and just be able to, maybe like every fourth water stop I would take one and that's such a game changer.
So, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And a lot of times when you have those salty like tab kind of things, um, it's not always so sugary based. And if you like, especially if they're like dissolving in your mouth and stuff like that, so that can be a nice like breakaway from like the goos and the sugary stuff. So that kind of helps like from that standpoint. Um, when I was in just out of college, I was racing some of the U.S. championships, and I remember I was a try hard back then. I was like really just trying to like be super tough and trying to make it as a pro runner. And at a lot of these big races, you'll room with some random runner, another elite runner. And so I met this guy from California, and he was a young and up and coming guy, and so we were sort of right on the same level of being competitive. And I remember he ran into one of his buddies the night before, and they went out and they had a beer the night before. And I was like, I thought that was crazy. I was literally like, dude, why would you do that the night before a race? And I was like, I'm gonna crush you the next day. Well, it went the exact opposite. This dude like rocked me the next day and just kicked my teeth in. And then I was like, I literally during the race, as he was like pulling away from me, I was like, I should have went out and had that beer with him.
Had a good time and
Cause
let
I was
loose.
like overly stressed and I was like overly like anxious about it. And then now anybody that knows me or is around me the night before a race, like it's like I'm like pretty like just chill about it. And it took a while to sort of work that into my system. But a lot of times, like, good glass of wine, whatever, like just kind of knock the nerves off, I think is an important key.
Yeah, because it's important that you just recently on my social media for some reason, this particular quote from Kobe Bryant, I don't remember the exact quote, but they're just talking about how like he has talked about many times how he could go into games confident slash cocky about them because he knew all the work that he had done
Yeah.
leading up to it. He knew all the hours of training, of shooting, of prepping, of everything. And so he knew he was ready. And if he just went into it like leaning into that, he would perform the way he knew he could. And so it's kind of the same thing. Like there's, you can't overthink it the night before. And you have to be honest with yourself, like I'm going into Columbus honest that like I'm not going to get that PR and I've adjusted my goals because I know that I did not prepare the way
Yeah.
that I should have.
Well, one of the things that I think people miss out on a lot too is visualization. And if you think about this, like, we put in all this preparation with running and training and lifting and everything, but almost nobody visualizes. And the key thing about like one of the Kenyan mantras is that a race must be run 1,000 times in your head before you even toe the line. And the brain knows no difference between reality and dream. And so if you are visualizing and you are sort of walking yourself through successful things happening that day, then your brain just sort of goes, okay, it's just, this is how it's going to go. It's just like you're planning. It's just like anything. You're planning your route to work. So you go, okay, so you just drive to work. So your brain is very like active in that sense. Like if you tell it what you want it to do on race day, it just will comply.
Because it thinks it already did it. So it already
Yeah.
knows.
And so like you just have to visualize what you want from that race day. And I feel like so many people put so much emphasis on like training and volume, but like almost nobody dreams. Like Emil Zatopek has a quote that said, a runner must run with dreams in his heart. And he won the 1956 Olympic marathon in his debut marathon after he won the 5,000 and 10,000,
That's crazy.
literally by dreaming. Just basically, he was just like, I just dreamt of finishing the race and being, a triple gold medalist. And,
Well, there's the research that they did with the elite athletes where they had electrodes hooked up and everything. And when they had them visualize them performing at their best, and I think it was all runners maybe, um, their the electrodes like measured that their muscles fired at the same
the
sequence.
nerves uh, in the brain, the nerves firing to the muscles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the same sequence and the same like intensity as if they had actually been running
Yeah.
their
And so this
event.
is a big thing in golf too, like where you basically practice the exact sequence of the swing. And then if you do like functional scans, like electrode scans of the brain, you'll find that the neurons are firing in the exact sequence as if you were swinging the club.
Yeah.
So to somebody looking at that scan, they can't tell, are they actually swinging the club or are they just literally sitting there thinking about swinging the club?
Right, which is
It's
amazing.
an amazing thing. So it's just really important that people visualize. And so don't cram it all into the night before. Like on all the miles that you're putting in, on all the times that you're running, and all the times that you're driving, or all the times you're sort of idle, just visualize what you want from the event. And it's just like any preparation. You can't cram the night before a race and training. Like you would never do that with visualization either. It has to be sequenced throughout the months prior to the event. Um, and people who do this, these are those gamers. These are those people that show up and they perform very consistently well because they just know that it just mostly is mental.
Okay, so the people that aren't as lucky as I am to get you to travel with them to races and treat you the night before, or the athletes at the USATF events, and even some of your patients that get to schedule their appointments accordingly, couple days out, night before the race, what should they be doing as far as like stretching and
Yeah,
prepping
so
or anything like that?
great question. So, there's a lot of topics here. So, let me just go through with what I do. So heading into, we'll start there and then we'll kind of go into what people should do. But one of the biggest things that I put an emphasis on heading into a major race for me is I will do a lot of sauna work heading into a major race. And the week of the race, I will use specifically an infrared sauna relative to the traditional Finnish. So a Finnish sauna is like the one with the rocks and the steam and stuff, and those get really hot. But the week of the race, we talked about hydration. I don't want to strap my system too much with, dehydration and all this sort of stuff. So I'd rather go into an infrared, which is going to give me a lot of energy, but also keep my blood volume high amidst my volume being lower. So that's the stimulus where I'm still maintaining a large blood volume and getting the heat adaptation, but I'm not draining my system with a lot of electrolytes and water. And I wouldn't sauna the night before or the day before the race, but up to 2 days before the race, I would continue doing that. So that's one of the most important things for me. The night before a race, and this is just me, but so I wouldn't try this unless you're, running some local 5K or
Don't
something
try
that,
this at home,
yeah,
kid.
something that doesn't really matter right now, but like not a major event. But I actually take an ice bath the night before, and that has to do with my fascia. So anybody watching, you can see like I'm pulling on my forearm here, and I have very loose fascia. So when I go into a cold tub for 20 minutes, that tightens my fascia and makes my muscles very dense and twitchy. This is not everybody would respond this way. So that's for me. That makes sense for me. If you're somebody who's naturally on the tighter side of things and you're just always the muscles are just always restricted and tight, and that's not a great idea to do that. But for me, it's more of a mechanical feeling. It's not even to get the inflammation out of there. It's more to just tighten and sort of get my tendons and Achilles and IT band and everything just sort of ready to go.
Now, with the ice bath, either leading up the night before, if you're battling an injury that you're trying to keep at bay, or just recovering from an injury that still tweaks a little bit or something,
Yeah, then that's still okay.
would you recommend to do
Yeah.
it then?
Yeah. And it depends on the nature of the injury. Like if you're going in with sciatica, well, then I wouldn't do an ice bath. But if you're going in with, an inflamed knee or an Achilles, then yeah, applying some, doing an ice bath or applying some ice is smart on that end.
Would you still do it the night before? Like, let's say this
Yeah.
person has no idea if their fascia is loose or not, but they,
And
like you
they're,
mentioned, like they twisted their ankle a couple weeks ago. It's still
yep,
bugging them a little bit. So would you do it the night before, 2 nights
I would
before?
still do it the night before. Yeah. Yeah. And you're going to be cold getting out because you're going to be in there for 20 minutes. And so you just go to bed with like a sweater on and just kind of like just deal with it. And
So it's literally right before bed.
it's literally the last thing I do before bed. So, say my race is the next morning at 6 a.m. I plan on waking up by 3. I'll go to bed by 10 and I take an ice bath at 9:30. So it's kind of crazy. But that's just me. But everybody's got to kind of figure out their rituals, sort of what makes sense for them. Now, with regards to mobilization, I think it's really good to just like, I think stretching and foam rolling and all that is good the day before. Don't overdo it though. Don't like do any stretches that you're not used to or foam rolling that you're not used to, because you don't want to like flare up an area or tweak an area. You don't want to be so stressed and like anxious that you're just kind of constantly stretching and constantly foam rolling, but maybe do it a smidge more than you would normally do it. But only do the ones that you know for sure don't hurt you. Don't add in a new one. Don't listen to if somebody says, "Oh, you got to do this stretch or whatever." Like, just do what only you're familiar with, because you can tweak things. Like I was texting her, kind of freaking out the day before I did the rim to rim to rim, because I did a different stretch. I literally did a different stretch once I got off the plane, and I actually tweaked my hip flexor, and I was like super stressed because I was about to do a 50-mile run the next day, but it ended up being fine. But again, don't make that mistake. But I do think it's important to do that. If you were wondering on whether or not you should stretch or foam roll, like one or the other, I would err on the side of foam rolling, because that's just going to be better off in terms of mobilizing the fascia, and it's going to have a little bit more of a morphological impact on the tissue. It's going to change the tissue chemistry a little bit more, and give you a little bit more relief. And I would also say, if you're heading into the race and you want to get a massage or treatment, I probably wouldn't get treatment the day before the event unless you're very familiar with that therapist. unless you've worked with that therapist. Like, for instance, with, you mentioned USA Track, all those athletes are very familiar with the style of work that the providers are going to give. So we can treat the athletes the day before, the day of, multiple times, because we know the kind of stimulus to give them, so that it's not too demanding or too stressful on their body to adapt to. So definitely don't get a massage the day before unless you're very familiar with that therapist.
Or that therapist is familiar with runners.
Yeah, well, maybe not even that, to be honest with you.
Really?
I would just make sure that you're just aware of how you respond to their specific treatment. You just don't want to, it's just not even worth it.
What about if it's like 3 days out?
So that's a good point. So that's fine, right? So I think the 2 days out, 3 days out is okay. Gives you more than 24 hours to adapt to the stimulus that you were given, but I wouldn't do anything unique and new the night before or the day before.
Now, you mentioned about what time you go to bed. So, like I know first couple times that we did Disney races, we had to get up at 4 a.m. And we're like, oh my gosh, we have to get to bed at like 6 p.m. And we attempted that actually a couple times and just laid in bed with our eyes wide open in our hotel rooms. So what, like you mentioned a little bit, don't worry about it. Go to bed early the first couple days. So if you have to be up at 4,
just go to bed like your normal time.
And just
unless your normal time is midnight, then
then just stay up and have a glass of beer and get ready for the race.
No, but no, I mean, just it's, you don't want to do anything too drastic or different the night before. I mean, it's really not going to change your event and your effort, and you just need to, most importantly, get that out of your head. Like I keep using New York as an example because you do have to wake up specifically really early for that event,
or just use all the Disney races
because you just have to get to the start line so early, and just go to bed at 10. Just go to bed at a normal time. Like, get the 5 hours of sleep. You're gonna be fine.
Boston is so interesting that they start so late.
Yeah, well, that kind of throws people off because you actually do. A lot of people do get a normal night's rest, and it kind of like it honestly, like, because if you go to sleep at 10, you wake up at 3, and you're kind of got jitters, that proves to be fruitful, right? Because you're like, your cortisol is high, your body's sort of stressed, and it's like it's like in a fight or flight mode. A lot of times for Boston, like, people get a little bit sluggish early on because the race starts at 10, and even though that's like maybe like a normal time that you might run on the weekend, it still feels so awkward because you are sleeping in a little bit longer, and it just feels a little different.
Throws people off.
So that's something you kind of want to prep for and heading into something like Boston.
Now, how much, let's just talk about the half and then maybe the full. How much of like goos and it's going to be different for everybody. I get that.
Yeah.
But like, just to kind of give people an idea.
Yeah. So usually in races over 90 minutes, so it's critical we say that. So if you're running a half marathon and you're doing it in 80 minutes, like, you really don't need to take in anything. You could, it maybe just is, a lot of it is just psychological. A lot of times when you put carbs in your mouth, your brain sort of frees up energy, doesn't know when this trauma is going to end. So a lot of times, like, if you kind of getting close to that 90-minute mark, that kind of matters. But
would you say that is true for even people who aren't used to, like, and this is throwing out a new term out there that maybe some listeners may not, but like being fat adapted, like, there's like, what if somebody is always taking something while they're running? Would they still, if they just carb up properly, do they still not need to pack
if it's less than 90 minutes, no, they don't need it.
So even if they haven't like trained themselves for that.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Like, when I was running, I've run 1 and 4 in the half marathon. And so it's just over an hour, obviously. And it's like, I think the couple times that I did it, I think I just put something in my mouth, like maybe a goo or something, slosh it around and just spit it out, because again, that kind of just like perks you up and just wakes you up a little bit. But I didn't want my body to toil with that, the processing of it, because it's not even going to be relevant for my system in terms of getting the energy out. But so if the event is over 90 minutes, you're doing a half or a full, and that's the case, then basically half hour, 45 minutes is kind of Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail, Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster without fail. Appreciate it. Ratio or a nice frequency to sort of make sure you take some things in. One of the mantras that has always worked for me racing wise is you want to eat early and eat often, because when you get later into those events, say you're heading into a marathon, once you get to like 18, 20-ish miles, what you take in really won't make a difference to the 26. So you want to make sure you get the bulk of what your calories in prior to that. So you might be at a little bit more frequent turnover, like more like a half hour or something like that. But again, some heavy carbohydrate like goo or shot blocks or something like that, and about every half hour to 40-ish minutes. And then if you have sufficient carbohydrate intake and there is some electrolytes in there, then I err on the side of not taking Gatorade, and I would err on the side of having just water. Because again, a lot of the dyes in there and the additives can slow down digestion and be a little bit rough on the GI tract. Um, if you have your own bottles, then obviously you put it with whatever you're familiar with in there. But that's sort of my suggestion along those lines.
Yeah, I mean,
And then the salt tabs that she was
yeah.
mentioning and like salt intake and electrolyte intake. Um, you need to know, are you a heavy salt sweater or are you a heavy water sweater? Like for instance, when I did uh 3 of us did the rim to rim to rim. When we finished, 2 of us really barely had salt stains and 1 had salt stains everywhere. So Zach had salt stains all over the place, so he needed way more electrolytes. Um, versus me and Adam, we sweat out mostly water, like a not real salty sweat. And so I personally, when I'm doing like longer events like a marathon, I don't really need salt tabs. Like I just don't. It's not my thing.
I do.
But she does. She has pots. And then she does need to make sure she has ample sodium throughout the event. And so that's an important component for her. And so she would take that a little bit more frequently. That might sit like more like 20-ish minutes.
Okay, so we talked about the stretching, talked about carb loading, water intake, some of the race prep or during the race of what to eat. What else would you say is needed out there? I think part of it too, I don't know if this kind of goes under the race prepping, but again, like when I first started running, I mean, my first ever Disney race even, it's just funny how, like you over prepare kind of, and you get all this information from different people. There was Facebook groups and everybody's putting stuff out there and you kind of think you have to do everything. And it took me quite a few years and a lot of conversations with you to realize like not everything that every single person does, my body particularly
Yeah.
needs but I just remember like, we always ran with like water backpacks and I don't know why, because we were doing these races that we knew had water stops.
Yeah.
But for some reason we thought that was going to help us, not thinking about like how much that water pack weighs and how that
Yeah.
throws you off, or can be more detrimental than helpful when you have access to the water stops. And then the other thing too was just like, and we kind of joke about this sometimes still, like over taping.
Yeah.
KT tape.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
would show up sometimes with like 3/4 of my leg covered up.
And that's a really good point. So with KT tape, I think you want to it works. It is not a placebo. Like it does work. If you don't think it works, go to YouTube and watch videos of when people put KT tape on cats or dogs. Our the sensors of our skin have a direct impact on how we are recruiting tissue deeper down. So if you put the tape on your quad, like you will recruit your quad differently. You will enhance recruitment. So areas of your body that are going to get beat up a little bit more during the event, there's no harm in slapping some tape on there. I would try it during training to make sure. So for me, that's my Achilles, and then it might be my hip flexors. Okay. So I might put a strip like kind of half above the waistline and half below the waistline on my hip flexors. And then I'll put one on each Achilles.
For me, it's always my left knee and my hip flexors.
Yeah. So her hip and then hamstring as well. So hamstring is another critical one.
Yeah.
And the hamstring one's an easy one, or the quad is an easy one. If you're running and it kind of starts to fall off, you just rip it off. But the Achilles is a little different. You want to make sure that, or your foot, you want to make sure that it's not bunching up and giving you blisters. So you got to try that first. But it does work. And I think people that are doing a lot of KT tape, before race, all around their knees and hips and everything, they're probably just not running great. Their form probably isn't very good. And so that's why
They need to read your book.
they need to read the Faster Without Fail, and they need to check into their form training a little bit. So that way they are running a little bit more efficiently and they're not beating their joints up quite so much. Because you want you want like if you're running a race and you finish and you're sore, you don't want your joints to be sore. Your feet and your ankles and your knees and your hips. You want your quad,
Your
you want your
muscles.
glutes, your calf. You want your primary movers to be sore. You don't want your hamstrings to be sore. You don't want your groin to be sore. You don't want your low back. Those muscles don't have anything to do with pushing you forward and running, but your quads, your glutes, your calves, those are appropriate areas to be sore after an event. And it should be equal, right? It should be bilateral. So, yeah, anyways, so tape can kind of help offset some of that.
What about either before the race, and I've grabbed this sometimes going through the med tents during a race, but things like BioFreeze or the CBD sports creams, or what should we how should we utilize that? Should everybody utilize it, anticipating if they're going to be putting a hard effort? Like what's the game plan
Yeah,
with that?
so there might be chemicals in there that you might not react well to, so you do want to try it beforehand. But those are all what we call topical analgesics. Basically, they will kind of not numb the area, but distract your brain of the pain in the area, and very effective. They're just very effective. And so, again, so you're running a race and you're going to be beat up in the quads or the calves. It's no harm in lathering those areas up with this topical analgesic, and basically that'll sort of help you move through some of the later race discomforts in those areas because your brain is just not as focused on them in a way.
Do you like one better than the other?
So I think if you're going to err on the side of anything, something with CBD was going to be a little bit more effective because it's actually going to have a little bit more impact on how the cell metabolizes some of the noxious signals from the run. But BioFreeze, Bengay, and China Gel, and all that—they're all basically the same thing. Now, once you get to like Tiger Balm, now that's a little bit more of like your habanero pepper, like that's a little bit more spicy on the body, and so you want to be careful where you're putting that, and not some gentle areas, some sensitive areas. And but that's going to be a little bit more effective too. When I was in college, there was one of my teammates. He would put on a latex glove every time before workouts and races, and he would like lather up his quads with Tiger Balm, just like literally lather them up.
I've never
And
even
then
heard of Tiger Balm. I have
and then
no
at the
idea
end
what
of
you're
the
talking
seat,
about.
yeah, it's just a much more spicy enhanced version of like a Bengay or something. And at the end of the season, he finally got an X-ray on his femurs, and he had 3 stress fractures. But he like literally was able to run through them because he was caking his legs with
Gee.
Tiger Balm.
Fun race tip too, if you do run past and use their BioFreeze, and sometimes some of the races will have them for you on like popsicle sticks, but sometimes they don't, and they pump it in your hand. And you wipe your forehead, and then you're sweating. Just know your eyes are going to sting. So just try to remember,
Yeah.
to kind of like which hand you used, or use like off sides of your hands or something, because or if you go to like clean something off your eye and that's the hand that you use for BioFreeze, like you're going to be blind for 30 seconds.
Usually what I do, like, so especially obviously if I'm sweating in the race, if I get like goo on my hands, or like, something like Body Glide, or not Body Glide, but Bengay or BioFreeze or something on my hands, I'll like rub my hands on my neck and then wipe it off like on my thighs or something, just to like get it off. So that way I know I can like touch my eye and just sort of not have to deal with that. But you just have to, it's just like anything. You just got to be aware of how you're managing that. Last thing you want is not be able to see the rest of the race.
Now, we can't do the BioFreeze or the whatever lotion, CBD, and KT tape in the same areas, because then the KT tape will fall out. How do you recommend one over the other for certain things?
You can.
How do you decide?
So when you're applying KT tape, you want it to be on for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes before you get it wet. So you should put the tape on after you shower. And then as long as it's within, or as long as it's past the 30 to 45 minutes, you can put, Body Glide, or not,
Oh,
BioFreeze or Tiger Balm in an area where the tape is. That's fine.
oh, okay.
Mhm.
It's not going to make the tape fall out.
No, not necessarily, because tape nowadays, the adhesive is so good, and it should be fine.
Okay.
So, but you don't want to put it like directly on the tape, because that doesn't make any sense. But if,
Like
you
around the area that it's at.
say like I'm taping my Achilles, like I could put some on my calf at proper, and it would get the same sensation.
Cool.
So, yeah. Any other final points?
No, I think we
Uh,
should maybe bullet recap some of the stuff though, because we went on a
yeah, I
few
think
tangents and jumped around.
we did. I think the biggest theme is don't try anything the day before the race or the day of the race that's
Yeah.
new. Um, you want to carb load right up to 2 days before the race, and your last major meal is the day, or the breakfast before your race. So the day before,
So again, if you're running on a Sunday, you're
then
talking
you're
about big dinner on Friday, Saturday morning, big breakfast.
exactly, yeah, and then the rest of the day you're kind of just getting through. Now, again, everybody has to try this on their own, and I'm sure a lot of people have their routines, but just know, like, your gut consumes a lot of energy. 70% of your immune system is in your gut. It's going to take a lot of blood flow if you put a huge bolus of food through there. So just kind of keep that in mind. Takes 24, 36 hours to get those bolus through. So just be smart on that end. And then sleep the night before is not critical. It's critical the 2 nights before, up to 5 nights before. So you just want to make sure you're getting good night's rest there. And
I
then,
also fail that leading into Columbus.
yeah. So
This is
that's
going to be fun on Sunday.
yeah, you're just such a gamer. So that's the thing. She's so chill about it. So she's going to show up and be fine because she's just such a gamer. It's like she doesn't talk herself out of things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I adjusted my expectations because I think there's still, as we've mentioned a couple times, like there's value in still showing up and doing and performing and completing that hard thing that you maybe don't even want to do
Yeah.
instead of just kind of throwing out the window. So even if things don't go as planned, you get an injury, life happens, whatever, just still show up. You signed up, go get it done. There'll be benefits to that still.
Yeah. So then you want to, the week heading into the race. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, actually, I do want to mention is
We can't even get through bullet points without getting sidetracked.
there's just a lot of information, right? So, like, about roughly 2 weeks before the race, um, it's probably smart to increase your core work, because it takes about 2-ish weeks to adapt to the core work. It adapts pretty quick. And most of us, our lives are busy and crazy. And so most of us aren't doing consistent core work. But if you ramped it up like every other day or every day, the 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks prior to the race, even heading into the race, not the day before, but even heading into the race, that's going to be very beneficial for you. So that's one of the things, as the volume is dropping and you have a little bit more time on your hands from working out, take that extra time and do core work. Because even if you've done no core work the whole training cycle, like, do it those final 3 weeks. You can cram core work. That is a thing. Um, so you can cram for microbiology and you can cram for core work. So it's important for you to do that.
And you have a great video for that, don't you? Co-work for runners and
Yeah,
stuff
like
on your YouTube channel.
on the Running Rehab YouTube, yeah, there's some great ones that are specific for like heading into races. And so that's definitely something you want to check out. Now, one thing we didn't talk about either is like running the day before the race or that kind of thing. I think it's important to run frequently the week of the race, but not far. You just want to keep the tendons supple. You want to keep the joints moving. You want to keep the heart rate. You want to get the heart moving a little bit more, get the blood pumping, but you don't want to overwhelm yourself. So I usually don't run the day before a race. When I was running professionally, I would, because I was running a lot more miles, but nowadays I don't really do that. And so I think it's just important for you to sort of just feel that out on where you're at on that spectrum. But the week of the race, it is important for you to run fairly often, and then just kind of go with what you're used to, if you're used to like running the day before or not. But I think that's a case by case situation. If you're coming down from high volume, 70, 80, 100-mile weeks kind of thing, yeah, you're going to want to run the day before, because your body is just used to like that high frequency of running. If you're coming from like me, like 20, 30 miles a week, probably don't need to run the day before. It's not really worth it. unless you're like getting off a plane and you kind of just want to unwind some things. But even then, the run might just be like a mile or two. If you are coming from a high volume training cycle and you're younger, so you're in your 20s or 30s, then your peak, the amount of time that you're actually hitting the peak can be up to 3-ish weeks. You kind of want it to be maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks as a prime. If you're in our situation, we're running lower volume and we're not really, and we're obviously in our 40s now. So basically a 10-day peak is sufficient.
What do you
So
mean by that?
what I mean by that is your volume is dropping so that your body is
Oh,
starting to recover a little bit more. So say you were running 50 miles a week on average through your training cycle. Well,
10
if
days out, you want to drop
10
that.
days out, you want to drop down. So you want to butt it up a little bit closer. But say you were running 100 miles a week. Well, now you're coming down from 40,000 feet. So it's like landing a plane. If the plane was only at 20,000 feet, it has less of a descent. So if you're at 50 miles a week, you really don't need to descend that much to like 20, 30-ish for the peak. So you don't really need to wait or to do it over 3 weeks. You can do it over 10 days. But if you're coming from 100 miles a week down, that's that 40K. So it's going to take a little longer to descend. So obviously you want to do that a little bit more over the 3 weeks. So just kind of keep that in mind based on where you're coming out with the volume. And but again, when you are peaking, a lot of times it's better to break those runs up into more frequent runs so that way you can kind of keep your tendons and body moving and it's familiar still with running.
I actually just thought of two questions that we didn't hit, or that at least popped in my head right now. Um, and I'll just ask them both, and they're different topics, so then you can come and answer them. But we didn't touch upon, like, once you're up, once you've taken your shower, you're taped up, do you eat? What do you do before the
Yeah,
race?
so I generally don't eat anything within 30 minutes of the race or within 3 hours of the race. So if the race is at 7 in the morning, I'll wake up at like 3:30, 3:45, and then I'll eat at 4, and then that's it.
And how much are you eating? What are you
And
eating?
so I'll usually eat like a banana and maybe just like a bar of sort. Um, and then what I might do within that 3 hour window is I might sip on some element and kind of go from there. If it's a marathon, I might a half hour to 45 minutes before the race take some Morton, um, some of the Morton,
The gel.
not the gel, but the powder, the mix,
Why not
and
the gel though? Is it different?
it is different, and it's just kind of adds a little bit more hydration. So I might do that, but if I'm feeling really good and I'm sticking to my normal tradition, it's basically just like not much within 3 hours of the race. And then, yeah, so that's typically what I do for that. If I'm running like a faster, like 5K or 10K or even a half marathon, then I, right before the race, I might actually take like a goo or something like that to kind of just like get some free energy in my system real quick. And I might do that. But if I'm doing a marathon, I actually don't do that right before the race because I kind of want to start in the fat burning zone and I want to stave off carbohydrate usage early in the race. So I'm typically not consuming anything like right before the race.
And then the other thing is, right before you're running or right before you're going to take off, what do you do? Like, are you doing a jogging warm up? Are you doing stretches?
If
Like,
it's a
what are you doing?
marathon, I literally don't do anything. I'll just stand in the corral and just do some light mobility. Typically, you're going to be walking anyways to the start line or something like that, and that'll be enough for me. If I'm doing, anything shorter than the marathon, like half or 10Ks or whatever, I'll do roughly 2 to 3 mile warm up and then get some strides in there. And I'll typically start my warm up about 45 minutes to an hour before the race. And then finish the warm up about a half hour before the race, get my gear on, all that sort of stuff, and then do some strides and kind of feel twitchy and fast.
Are you doing things like leg swings though? Like, are
Yeah.
you doing
So,
anything to, like, even with the marathon? Are you just like
so
waiting at the start line, or are you doing anything to kind of get going?
yeah, you want to get moving a little bit. So if you're just stuck in a corral, say you're at like Chicago Marathon or New York or something, and you're like stuck in a corral for like an hour, you know, yeah, do some leg swings,
Lunge matrix.
do like lunge matrix, which is also on the Running Rehab YouTube page. You can do like kind of granny walk moves to kind of mobilize the hamstring. That's also on that page. So there's basically just some foot and ankle drills to kind of loosen up the ankle and calf. Um, and there's a whole like routine that I want to put together on like what to do in the corral in terms of keeping things loose. But yeah, those are kind of your basic things that you want to do. But leg swings are always a critical thing. Some light plyometrics where you're doing some kind of A skips, B skips, and a little bit of stuff like that to kind of just warm the legs up. Um, but yeah.
I remember when I first started running and did a few 5Ks, 10Ks, and even some of the halves. And, like these runners would be running before the race. And I remember just being mind blown, like, why the hell would they do that? Like,
Well, if you
they're running, like, it's like, I'm already running 3 miles. Like, I'm not going to run another mile. Like, I'm just going to stand here and wait to then run my 3 miles.
well, it's funny. You go to you watch like a baseball or football game on TV, and they're doing the national anthem. They're literally sweating.
Yeah,
So
I know.
it's the
But
same
that
thing
was
with running.
mind blowing to me. Again, somebody who doesn't even like running. But it was just like, oh my gosh, like, how can they run 2 miles before they run their 10K? Like,
when I was running at a
that
high
seemed
level,
really like, backwards. Like,
yeah. When I was running at a high level, and what I would do before my marathons is I would walk, jog 10 minutes. So I would just literally start walking for a minute and then just jog a little bit and walk a minute and jog a little bit. And I just did that for 10 total minutes. That's what I would do right before like I ran my PR in the marathon. So basically just to get moving and just to kind of like you're antsy, right? You're stressed. So you want to do something, but you don't want to do something that's gonna like elevate your heart rate too much unless you're like running like a 5K or 10K where it's like you got to be fast right out the gates. But if you're running like a marathon or a half, like it's smart to ease into those events and come at it from like a relatively like low tone and low energy standpoint and just ease into it and just let your sort of get your legs under you and just kind of let that event come to you.
all right. So should we try bullet points again?
I don't even remember half the stuff we said. So
Well, the key points,
luckily there's the show notes so you can go back and look
Yeah.
at those.
but we just talked about carb loading, a couple days out, hydrating throughout the week,
Yeah. And then
foam rolling the
focusing on
night before,
electrolytes.
lay out your flat buddy. It's always a great Instagram post.
Hmm. Let everybody know what you're going to look like.
What else?
Yeah. And then,
Taping and, one of the things what's your thought on, which I think I know what the answer is, but I used to, because I had this like I had this injury in my knee when I was a kid that just never got taken care of properly. And so my left knee tends to always bug me to some extent running, especially going into marathons. And so I got in this horrible habit. And so if you're listening and this is what you do, I admit it's a bad habit that I used to do, where I would take Advil before I even started running.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. A lot of people do
Right.
that. And I'm not a big fan of that.
Right.
That puts a lot of undue burdens on some key organs, on your liver specifically and your kidneys. Your liver is where a lot of glycogen is stored. So if you're about to hum in a marathon, like the last thing you want to do is restrict that port of getting glycogen out. Doesn't make any sense to me to do that. Obviously, if you're injured and you're dealing with some stuff, like that's different. But
Well, one of the great things,
preemptively, like I probably wouldn't do NSAIDs. And if you have that habit, I would get away from it because it's chewing up your stomach lining because you don't have a lot of food in your system. So when you take them, like there's not really like anything to protect
any
it.
buffers.
If you're wanting to do something that's anti-inflammatory and not chew up your GI tract, then you can do Voltaren.
I was about to say that because that used to not be available back then.
Yeah, so you can lather up some Voltaren in lieu of like the Tiger Balm or something like that, or even mix it in together. But that's going to be a little bit more of a topical anti-inflammatory rather than having to go through your system.
Yeah, that was a terrible habit that I used to have.
And it's common, it's kind of an old school thing, but it's just not smart. There's just no logic to it. All right, so I think that kind of wraps up the episode. Any final points you want to make?
No.
All right, so thanks for everybody for watching. We'll kind of put in the show notes all the key tidbits here, and good luck to all the events that you have coming up. And
hopefully this all helps.
Re-listen to this episode whenever you're kind of heading into it to kind of just get your mind right and get your routine right and sort of kind of button up some of the strategies for heading into a good event. Enjoy.